Normally when I'm doing the main talk, I like to get another person to do the MC, and I just totally forgot today. So anyway, I'm introducing me as the main speaker. And okay, if you saw like the emails and stuff earlier this week, it said that the talk was going to be part 2 of my talk on empathy. And that was the original plan, but you see, when you start writing, sometimes other stuff comes out. And I'm not going to do that today. I'm doing something else. And this is, I mean, you know, but it's, you know what it's like when you're in the creative process or whatever. So, I mean, I was thinking about empathy, but it led to other stuff. And so the name of today's talk is Emotionally Rational. I think there may be some nice tie-ins to what Fred talked about, too. So I'm going to start with a thesis statement that's going to put some of you guys on the defensive. So I want you to bear with me, okay, because we're going to go somewhere with this. I think it's going to make sense, but don't get defensive, okay? And the thesis statement is, science is boring, okay? See? Well, I said bear with me. Did I not say bear with me? I knew that was going to, yeah, okay, so, and this is one of the challenges in presenting and promoting kind of a more secular, rational view of the world. It's why it's hard to get large chunks of America to understand that vaccines are a good thing, that climate change is a reality. It's far more effective when the senator from Podunkville stands up with his snowball and says, "What global warming?" Okay. Now you might object. Well, what about Neil deGrasse Tyson? He's not boring. Yes, he is not boring. But he is like the Frank Sinatra of science, okay? Seriously. He makes the material compelling. So he is a rarity. I mean, the world would be totally different if everybody's high school science teacher was like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Ain't going to happen. Well, you may say, but what about all the great stuff on the Science Channel and Nat Geo and the Discovery Channel? That's not boring, yeah, but it's also mostly not science. The science stuff on TV shows tell us a lot about the conclusions of science, and that's fascinating stuff, don't get me wrong. I mean, I read the science section of the New York Times every Tuesday, you know, from front to back. But it's the conclusions of science that I find interesting, from quarks to black holes and everything in between. Fascinating conclusions. But getting there is another matter. It's the scientific method is a slog. The careful, plodding, often tedious work necessary to generate the conclusions of science, and that's what you need to get there. That's the hard part. And that's why I am quite happy to have other people do my science for me and listen to what they're going to say. The scientific method simply showed up too late in the evolution of our species for us, you know, for it to be kind of a part of the repertoire of stuff we naturally do. I mean, like Fred said, 500 years ago, we didn't know much about how anything happened. This is very, I mean, the genus Homo has been around for 2 million years. Homo sapiens for 200,000 years. So this is like, you know, really, really recently. Natural selection did not hardwire us for it. So what did natural selection hardwire us for? For experience, for emotion, for feeling, for awe, for reverence, for those things that when we do them make us feel really alive. Case in point, last Friday night we had an Oasis karaoke night, and like almost 50 of us showed up. And many of us sang our hearts out. And the folks that didn't sing enjoyed being there listening to the music. It was great. But what if instead of karaoke, we had, I don't know, a quadratic equation solving night? Okay, I knew somebody would say that. Yeah, okay. Okay, you can start your small group. There are people here that would do that with you, okay? It wouldn't be 50 people, okay? So, likewise, whenever we have potluck suppers, A lot of Oasians come out. It's fun. We have a good time with the food and the fellowship and the social time. But we don't have science of cooking nights where we discuss the molecular changes that happen in our food preparation. Now, only when you burn it, yeah. No, and then they do on the Food Network. They have these, these kind of more scientific approach to cooking shows from time to time, and Alton Brown tries to do that in America's Test Kitchen and stuff, where they try to explain, the science behind the cooking, but it takes all the fun out of it. I mean, okay, everybody knows if you grill steaks, everybody knows you're supposed to put a good sear on the steak to what? Seal in the juices, right? Humanity has known that, since the invention of fire, right? Now, science has completely debunked that, sadly, and shown that putting the sear on actually makes your steaks less juicy. And you know what? Who cares? I don't care. I don't care about the caramelization. It tastes good. I'm doing it, It's fun. I like the flame, I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, no, actually, the science behind the searing thing is, but beyond that, you want to give the talk? Okay. That the searing the meat makes us think the steak is juicier because the smell of the sizzling steak causes us to salivate a lot. So. Now, how would it sound if, I'm having you over my house and I'm cooking steaks for you, how would it sound if I said, oh, I'm going to put a good sear on these steaks to make you drool more? No, it doesn't sound good, So that might be the science, but it's, who needs it? Now, as long as humans have been around, we've been doing things to intensify our emotions and heighten our experience of life, right? And you go back to the cave paintings of 30,000 years ago, you go back to 5th century BC Athens, where Aeschylus wrote these tragedies that, were staged as, huge dramatic productions, where apparently the emotional highs and lows of Aeschylus's tragedies were so kind of intense that it was said back then that sometimes pregnant women went into labor watching Aeschylus's tragedies. This had a huge impact. So, and that's also one role. This is, Fred was talking about the uses of religions. One role religion, I think, has traditionally played. From my perspective, I think it was a big source of entertainment for much of human history. If you read about kind of the rituals and the festivals around the ancient pagan temples, it sounds like a riot. I mean, it just sounds like craziness. And or even think about the medieval cathedrals. If you've been to Europe, you see cathedrals all over the place. And just imagine if you're a medieval peasant, living in your shack, eating gruel, taking a bath twice a year, pretty miserable existence. And then you walk into one of these cathedrals, and what do you see? I mean, soaring architecture and stained glass and art and candelabra, and there's choirs and there's billows of incense. I mean, it's like stepping into another world. It must have been like walking into the Emerald City. It was a change from the drab dreariness of everyday life. And there's a whole lot more you could unpack about what came out of the life around the medieval cathedrals. The first rock festival was actually held in Germany in the late 1800s. Okay, it wasn't a rock festival because rock music hadn't been invented yet, but it was a classical music festival that had essentially the same idea. And the event was the brainchild of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who envisioned a day-long gathering of young people for the loudest music he could create. He assembled, they didn't have amplification, obviously, so he just assembled the largest symphony orchestra that ever existed to kind of rock the place. And Nietzsche famously spoke about, and I meant to bring the whiteboard up because I really like to write, and we have a tiny one here, but oh well. Okay, Nietzsche spoke about two sides of human existence. You may remember the Apollonian, which was kind of the rational. Oh, don't worry about it, Michelle. Seriously, it's too late now. But thank you. Yeah. What was I saying? No. So he said there's the Apollonian, which is kind of the rational thinking, cool-headed side of, and then he talked about the Dionysian, which is emotion, feeling, ecstasy. And he talked about and one of Nietzsche's ideas was that Western civilization had come to be totally dominated by an Apollonian kind of Socratic rationality to the neglect of passion and fervor and feeling and emotion. And music for him was one way to reconnect with the passion and emotive side of life. Here's one of Nietzsche's most famous quotes: "Without music, life would be a mistake." That's a beautiful quote. Now, secularists have been notoriously suspicious of emotion. Not particularly big fans of the Dionysian. I mean, after all, hasn't emotion gotten us into a lot of trouble as a species, right? I mean, so many times when people get together and get carried up in the emotion of the crowd, emotion trumps reason, and people get hurt. Like in Afghanistan this week, where a crowd, burned and killed that poor woman who had burned the Quran. And true, that horrible stuff does happen. But let's consider the other side of the coin. When Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech before 200,000 people on the Mall in Washington, D.C., in front of the Lincoln Memorial, what if the people there had said, "Well, I don't want to be emotionally manipulated by this. Like, I agree with what he's saying, but I don't want to get caught up in this emotional ecstasy. I'm just going to go home." Well, if everybody had done that, the event wouldn't have happened, and the speech would have had no impact, and our national life would have been greatly diminished. I think we agree, right? And if Martin Luther King had just printed his speech in like a full-page ad in the major newspapers of the United States, would not have had the same impact. Because you needed to be there, because we humans crave experience, tangible, visceral, emotional experience. You had to be there in the moment to hear the cadences of his voice, to be swept up in a throng of 200,000 people who are ready for America to change forever. It's a perfect example of the balance that Nietzsche was talking about, of the Apollonian and the Dionysian, the rational and the emotive side coming together, enhancing each other, and changing hearts and minds forever. Last Saturday, we had an Oasis service project at Project Cure. It's a wonderful organization that delivers much-needed medical supplies to developing nations. And I went along on that. It was a great day, good project. But before we started our work, they said, you have to sit down. They had a lot of rules over there. And they said, yeah, you have to sit down and watch this orientation video. Well, we've never had to do that. But, okay. And so the skeptical, rational side of my brain was like, okay, this better be worth my time, because we're here to do work, and our time is precious. Plus, it was on Saturday from noon to 2, which kind of coincides with my Saturday nap time, so I was giving up a lot to be there. It's big for me to miss my nap, and so this better be worth it. So, okay, I'll watch your video, because apparently you're making us watch your video. So we had to sit and watch the video, and I'm sitting here. Okay, well, it was pretty well produced. And then, they talked about the work their organization does, and then they started showing, pictures of the sick little kids with flies buzzing around their heads, and people lying in hospital beds in horrible conditions. And by the time the video was done, I was like ready to personally row a boat of medical supplies to Africa. I mean, all they needed was Sarah McLachlan singing "Arms of an Angel," and I would have lost it. I would have totally, And so, it had its effect. I see why they want you to watch the video, because it made me feel better about the work we did in the warehouse. I'm packing boxes. Yeah, I'm thinking about those people. I want this, it made a difference in the work that we did that day, connecting to real human needs and real human stories. I saw something in Austin the other day that kind of gave me a little bit of hope for humanity. I was up there Wednesday night to take in some of the South by Southwest music with my son, and while we were there, we stopped in at a coffee shop. They have all these great independent coffee shops in Austin, and we went in this coffee shop. I thought, there was a lot of people in there, but something felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, so I'm standing in line and looking around, and you know what it was? it was full of young, cool, good-looking Austinites doing their cool thing, and I was looking around, and there are a lot of people that were like writing, with a real pen, on real paper, in little moleskin journals, and they didn't have laptops or phones. It was like Throwback Wednesday. It was like, they had Wi-Fi. No, this was a conscious attempt to spend time writing old school in a journal on stuff. And then I heard recently that now there's a new demand from college students for textbooks, to have less of the stuff available online, they're asking for more textbooks so they can write in them. And when you're reading a textbook, you can kind of memorize where stuff is on the page and stuff like that, but there's some kind of yearning. And some of the guys in the coffee shop were sporting the big, 19th century hipster beards, and or Duck Dynasty beards or whatever. And that got me started thinking about the whole hipster phenomenon. Like, with the big beards and smoking the Lucky Strikes and drinking the Pabst Blue Ribbon, there has to be something going on here. And I'm just thinking out loud, but there has to be something going on here beyond a mere fashion statement. Like, what is the fascination with retro stuff? Even to the point of actually taking up pens and writing again. And I wonder if there isn't some kind of yearning for experience. It's kind of a mini Dionysian effect. Wanting something to touch, to hold, to feel, that maybe it's a small rebellion at the ways our technological world sometimes flattens out and diminishes human experience, which I think it does. That's why I do not use GPS. I'm not saying that as a matter of pride. I'm not criticizing people who do GPS. I'm afraid that if I use GPS, I'll become dependent upon it, and it'll make me become more disengaged from my world and my surroundings. I was a Boy Scout. I know how to use a map. Well, and when you're using GPS, you don't have to be engaged in any way at all with your surroundings. You don't have to think other than to think when to turn, when it tells you to turn. So in a sense, you become like this agent for GPS. Someone I read said it's like being in a Beckett play without the jokes. You're just being told, a little drama humor. Okay. Now don't get me wrong, GPS is amazing, but when I drive around, I want to know. I still want to know if I'm going north, south, east, west. I want to kind of be in tune with the angle of the sun and see the trees and the bayous or what, and landmarks and buildings. I want to be in touch with my environment, and GPS would strip me of that. I'm afraid. Now, it would be more rational to use GPS, wouldn't it? It'd be very much more rational. It might save some gas. I might get places more efficiently. But I'm afraid if I use it, I'll feel less connected to the world, a little bit less alive. Plus, is the point of life really to be more efficient? Is that what it's about? Clearly not. Clearly not. Look at our own lives. Even in the little things, we see it in very small things. Consider the morning ritual of having a cup of coffee. Now, a lot of people say they want their coffee for their morning pick-me-up, right? They say, I really haven't had my first cup yet. I need a pick-up. Okay, well, if all we needed was a morning pick-me-up, I had this thought, Starbucks could have like an express lane in the drive-thru where they just toss 125 milligram caffeine pills out the window with a little, caffeine pill and a cup of water would give you your jolt, right? It would give you the jolt. But that's clearly not the only thing. It's the morning coffee experience is more than that. It's it's the aroma of the coffee. It's holding it in the warmth of your hand. It's the interaction with the barista and the people in line, or if it's at work with the people that are like we do here, gathered around the coffee station. There's this kind of tactile sensory experience, and it's not just about getting the caffeine. It's much more than that. And so I think Nietzsche may have been onto something when he talked about the Apollonian and the Dionysian side of human existence. And maybe it's when we combine the two that we are at our best. I think I told this story maybe 2 years ago, but there's a lot of newer faces, so it's worth telling. It's a story that I think illustrates this kind of integration of the Apollonian Dionysian sides of our existence. One of the most colorful politicians in American history was Fiorella LaGuardia, who was the mayor of New York during the Great Depression and the Second World War. Fascinating guy, little guy. He was 5'4", always wore a carnation in his lapel, and he was known for doing very colorful things. Like he would take entire orphanages out to ball games. When the New York City newspapers went on strike, he went on the radio and read the Sunday funnies for the children so they would still get their Sunday comics. He was amazing. Actually, and he was a Republican who worked closely with FDR to implement the New Deal. Fascinating guy. And one of the interesting things he did was, like, one night in 1935, it was a cold January night, he went over to a night court in one of the poorest sections of the city, and he dismissed the judge for the evening and took over the bench himself. And the first case they brought up this elderly woman in rags who had been accused of stealing a loaf of bread. And she told the mayor that her daughter's husband, and remember, this is Great Depression, 1935. She told the mayor that her daughter's husband had deserted her, her daughter was ill, her grandchildren were starving, and the owner of the store refused to drop the charges because he felt like it was a bad neighborhood, an example needs to be made. So Mayor LaGuardia turned to the woman and said, "I've got to punish you. The law makes no exceptions. $10 or 10 days in jail." But even as he was pronouncing the sentence, LaGuardia reached into his wallet and pulled out a $10 bill, threw it in his hat, and he said, "Here is the $10 fine, which I now remit. Furthermore, I'm going to charge everybody in this courtroom, I'm going to fine everybody in this courtroom 50 cents for living in a town where a woman has to steal bread to feed her grandchildren." And he instructed the bailiff to collect the charges. The next day, the newspaper reported that $47.50 was turned over to an old lady who had stolen bread to feed her starving grandchildren. That amount was contributed to by the grocery store owner, about 70 petty criminals, and New York City policemen who had just paid 50 cents for the privilege of doing so, and everybody in the courtroom gave the mayor a standing ovation. You want 50 cents now? We have a fundraiser on Saturday. Okay. That's the opportunity we have here to build that kind of, well, it's on our tagline, a community of compassion and reason. I didn't think about it to now, but we have them both in our tagline, don't we? We have the Apollonian and we have the Dionysian, a place where we can inspire each other, support each other, and from time to time experience laughter and tears and being caught up together in something wonderful, something larger than us, because those are the things that make life worth living. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you.